I'm wondering if any of you have ever experienced, whether you could still be young and experience this one, but if you're a parent especially, if you're a grandparent, if you've been around children, if you've ever experienced one of those moments where you knew without a shadow of a doubt that you knew better than the person who was under your authority about something that they were getting ready to do, and they didn't listen. Has anybody ever experienced a moment like that? Where it's like, I know that I know better than they do, but they think that they know better. Am I the only one that has experienced that? Because what I was really hoping was that I could get a volunteer to share about an experience with your children, because my children get tired of it when I share about the experiences that I have with them. Anybody willing to share an experience of when you knew better, but your child wouldn't listen? Yes, the Snyders raised their hand really fast on that one. So I'm going to come out here and I'm going to let Lori share her story.
So several years ago, when my kids were still in high school, I had heard that you cannot drink a gallon of milk in less than an hour. I told them it was impossible. Well, New Year's Eve, we had a youth party at our house, and all these guys come walking in with a gallon of milk. And we told them, you can't do it. And they said, yeah, we can. We like milk. Well, Rick and I went outside, and we got 5-gallon buckets and took them downstairs, and they were fighting over them before the hour was up. And some of them were running outside because you cannot physically drink a gallon of milk in less than an hour. So they learned better. I knew better.
And you knew better than to let them have access to milk in your home anymore. So everybody learned in this experience. Yeah, we have those moments where we know without a shadow of a doubt that we know better. I can come up with examples with my own kids. I can come up with examples of the girls' soccer team. I think it's a pretty consistent theme throughout the course of a season that Coach Minderman and I will look at each other and something happens, like, man, it's almost like we told them that would or would not work. Coach Martineau's sitting out there. He knows what I'm talking about. Like, yeah, there are those moments where you're sitting there going, we knew better. We knew them, in this instance, literally better than they knew themselves. But they thought that they knew better. And I've come up with a theory. It's only a theory, and I don't know how to test it. I don't even know the best way to start studying it. But it's a theory that is based on my own life experiences, that is based on my own observations, that is based on conversations that I've had. And that is that I theorize, maybe say I hypothesize. I don't remember the whole scientific method, so I don't remember which one comes first. But my theory is that while, for many of us who follow Christ at least, we say that He knows best, that He knows better than we do, and deep down we know that's true and we believe that, but we live as if we know better than He does. Based on the decisions that we make in a given moment, we're actually living out the belief that we actually know better than He does. I mean, the number of times that I've heard a conversation of somebody coming in and saying, I know that's what Scripture says, but, and then they give their logical reason as to why God was wrong. Now, they won't say that because they're talking to a pastor. And at least if you're involved in the church, you don't usually go to the pastor and say God was wrong. People outside the church aren't afraid to say that at all. But people inside the church are usually a little bit more hesitant to say that to me. But we live as if it's true. Or at the very least, if He's not wrong, he just doesn't understand. Or He doesn't get me. You know, that's true for someone else, but that's not true for me. Maybe I'm totally off base on this one, but that's a theory that I've come up with over 42 years of living, over 20 years of being a pastor, is I truly believe, and I'm throwing myself into that box because the number of things that I can look at in my life and say, I've professed faith, but the way that I just lived out that moment doesn't add up that I actually believe that He knows better than I do. Last week, I encouraged you to spend some time this week walking through Psalm 139. You know, I mentioned the last couple of verses in that chapter where the psalmist, David, is writing those words, search me, O God, and know my heart, and reveal if there is any grievous way within me. And so, as we were talking about what it means to be an artificial Christian, to not be an authentic Christian, but just someone who gives a lot of lip service, basically. And maybe even we're trying, but we're not there. And, you know, I just made that invitation. Spend that time in Psalm 139 this week and see what God has to say to you throughout the course of the week. I don't know if you did that or not. I hope you did. But this morning, we're going to spend some time digging into Psalm 139 because I think that Psalm 139 actually reveals a lot about, one, what God knows about us, but it also provides an incredible peace in the belief that he actually does know better than we know ourselves. I almost, as Courtney was asking me, because she started, in the back of the handouts there, she's like, what's the title? I'm like, I don't title things until afterwards because I don't know what they're titled, but we were spitballing titles, and the one that kept rolling through my head was Father Knows Best. Anybody grow up watching that show? I didn't, because it was like 30 years before I was watching TV, but if you grew up watching that one, you're in an older generation than I am, so I don't know what the young people think of you. I know they think I'm old. But anyway, that was really mean, and I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I take that back. The psalmist David, I want to give you a brief history of him, and then we're going to jump in. And truthfully, I'm just going to give you more commentary than anything on this. But the psalmist, if you remember his story, is David. David was the guy that he was out in a field, and he was a shepherd, and God sent a prophet by the name of Samuel to come and to find David and to anoint David to be the next king over all of Israel. And Samuel gets to the home, and he comes in, and he's talking to David's father, Jesse, and he's saying, hey, bring your sons before me because one of them is going to be the next king of Israel. And Jesse brings in all these sons before Samuel. And Samuel keeps being told by God, like, not that one, not that one, not that one, not that one. And he's finally like, hey, do you have any more? And it's almost like Jesse sits there and goes, oh, yeah, I do have another son. I forgot about him. He's out in the fields. Let me go get him. And he brings David in, and sure enough, David is the guy that God has called Samuel to anoint as the next king of Israel. David's story rapidly, according to Scripture, in the pages that we get to read of it, it rapidly progresses to where David, he gets anointed as king, and at one point he's playing the harp to ease the current king's mind when evil spirits are tormenting him. And then he goes out, and he does that story that we all know, and if we watch sports, we hear it all the time. David slays Goliath. It's this, if you're watching sports, the Indiana Hoosiers were the David of last season, and they slayed Goliath after Goliath. You're welcome. I'm not a Hoosier fan. I still threw you a bone on that one. They went out. David was Goliath that slew the giant all season long. We still tell this story in culture, but it's a story that comes straight from Scripture. It's a true story. And David eventually becomes king, and, he's got some ups, and he's got some downs. But there's a point that comes along where he writes out this psalm. David was a poet, he was a musician, and he writes out the words to this psalm in 139, and he begins it this way. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all of my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain it. David starts off this psalm that he's talking to God by telling God a bunch of things that God already knows. There is not a thing that David said in those first 6 verses that God went, oh, I forgot that I knew that. I am so glad that you told me that that's what I know and that's what I can do. No, David starts off the psalm by acknowledging, by recognizing what it is that God knows. He's not telling God so that God can feel high and mighty and big and important. God already is all of those things, and he knows he's all of those things. He starts off telling God things that God knows, and I believe in large part because David needed to remind himself of who God is. When we come in and we worship through song and we're singing these songs, we're not telling God anything that he doesn't already know. What we are doing is we are acknowledging, we are recognizing, God, we know, we see who you are, And sometimes we're reminding ourselves of who God is, because throughout the course of our week, throughout the course of our life, it is so easy to forget who God is and what he can do and what he knows. And so David reminds, it's his personal reminder that he has for himself of the intimacy of God. And by intimacy of God, I mean the intimacy that he can have with God. Because the only way for God to know whether or not we are loving him with heart, soul, and mind that we're commanded to do is if God knows our heart and our soul and our mind. I've been married for coming on 20 years. August 4th, we're going to celebrate 20 years, and we're going to celebrate it by Sarah going back to school the next day. It's a great way to celebrate it, let me tell you. But for the last 20 years, I've gotten to know Sarah pretty well, I think, and she's gotten to know me, but I can at no moment say I know 100% for sure, without a doubt, what is going through Sarah's mind. I've picked up on some cues. I should probably pick up on some more. But I've picked up on some things that give me a glimpse into what she's thinking, but it's only because she's allowed me to see that. She's let a wall down so I could see that. Whereas God, David is reminding himself about God, that God doesn't even need us to tell him, because he already knows. And that can sound terrifying. That can sound scary, because I know I've got some thoughts that run through my head like, man, I really hope God missed that one. I hope he was really busy and doesn't know what I just thought there. It can be scary, or it can be incredibly comforting, because it is a reminder right out of the gate in Psalm 139 of something that so many of us are longing for in our lives, whether we recognize it, whether we admit it, and that is that we are longing for somebody who knows us to still love us unconditionally. And David is reminding himself, and he's reminding us that God knows us, and he still loves us unconditionally. Then he continues on in verse 7. He says, "Where shall I go from your spirit, or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall guide me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness isn't dark to you. The night is bright as the day." And let me tell you, I live across the parking lot here, and those lights come on at night, and it is like bright as day in the middle of the night. I know what that feels like. The night is bright as day, for darkness is as light to you. David is looking at God. He's reminding himself. He's telling God, I recognize. He's reminding himself, and he's leaving a reminder for us about the proximity that God has to our lives. There are so many different worldviews about God. Our students just got done talking about some worldviews at their summer sprints a few days ago. But there are worldviews about God that say he doesn't exist in the first place. And so obviously, the God who doesn't exist in the first place has no proximity to you whatsoever, because how can something that doesn't exist be anywhere near you? There are worldviews that have the belief that God created all of this. He created the universe. He created the natural laws. He's the one who created gravity. He's the one who actually invented those laws that Einstein and Newton and all those guys wrote down on a board or on a piece of paper. He came up with those and then said, figure it out, y'all. I'm going to go on vacation. It's basically the worldview that says God is like the absent father. He's the one who came along and he had a part in my creation, and then he was gone after that. And there are people all over the world that ascribe to that worldview. That yes, there is a supreme being that created all of this, but that supreme being doesn't care about us anymore. There are worldviews that there was a supreme being who created all of this and then came along just so he could punish us when we get out of line. That's really the only job that he has, and that's the only role that he has. And then there's the worldview that David shares with us here. It's the worldview that says God is with us and he will never leave us. He is the God who created all of this, who created you, and he created me. And he created the stuff that we build things with. He created all of that, and he continually interacts with his creation. He is the God who came down in a human form, and then he is the God who left his spirit behind so that we can walk with his spirit. He is the God who interacted all through the Old Testament and continued to do so in the New Testament and continues to do so today. That's what David is reminding himself of. That's what David is reminding us of. And that's what so many of us need to hear. Is that God is not a God who doesn't care, and God is not a God who is just out to get you. God is a God who is with us, and he will never leave us. He walks in proximity with us. And the only way for that proximity to get distant or great is if we say, God, you stay, I'm going to go. Otherwise, he's going to walk with us each and every single day. Verse 13, for you formed me, or you formed my inward parts. This is how David knows that this is who God is. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. Now in the church, we've decided many times to latch onto these verses as a way to say abortion is wrong. Honestly, many times that's where I hear these verses used the most, is as an attack against the idea that you can just abort an unborn baby. And there's some truth in that, but I don't think that's what David was saying when he wrote these words. When David was writing these words, he was reminding himself, he was recognizing with God, he was reminding us all of these years later that God has known us and he has seen us since before there even was an us. Stop for a moment and think how incredible that is. That somebody, your parents, knew of you about 9 months before you came to be. They might have been hoping for you and longing for you before that moment, but about 9 months before you entered this world physically, that's when they first began to know about you. God knew before that. And God watched. He didn't need an ultrasound. He didn't need all those other fancy tools that doctors have. He saw every single piece of your body being knit together. You were not an accident. God knew the entire time, and God had a plan for you from the very beginning. He began to weave who it is that you were going to be. He began to weave your genetics together and your personality together. And while sin can do its thing there and kind of pull us away from that, he knew who you were designed to be. There's this myth that we know ourselves better than anybody else knows us. And in some ways that's true in the human form, but there is a God who knows us better than we could ever know ourselves, because he knew us before there even was an us. Consider David's story again, the guy writing this psalm. David is a guy who is out in the fields tending sheep, who maybe at some point in his life had this dream like, man, what would it be like to be king? You know, maybe he sat out in the fields and he pondered that. A lot of us do something like that. When I was little, I was going to be the next great NBA player, and then I stopped growing, and I was like, I'm going to be the next great shortest ever NBA player, and then I got taller than Muggsy Bogues, and I gave up on my NBA dream. But when I had this big dream of what it was going to be and what I would be, and maybe David did some of that, but I'll bet when he was standing in the field that day, he had no idea that Samuel was about to call him out of the field and anoint him as the next king. In fact, David's own father, I said this at the beginning, David's own father forgot that David was in the field. David's own earthly father forgot about that other son. But God didn't. God called David out of that field because he knew from before David ever took a step on this earth what David was capable of. He knew what he had created and designed David to be. It's what Paul wrote in the book of Ephesians. He knew that David was his masterpiece who had been created by him to do great things. And so David comes along years later as the king, and he writes these words, God, you knew me before I was even born. And where my father thought all I was good for was, and there's nothing wrong with tending sheep, don't take this the wrong way, but where my father thought all I was good for was being out in the fields away from everybody, tending sheep, you looked at me and said, no, you're a king. And that's what you can be. When you think about who it is that's writing this, I don't know about you, but like, wow, that's powerful stuff. And God thinks the same of each and every single one of us. He has known us and he has seen us since before that we even knew there wasn't us. Verse 17, how precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. If I would count them, they are more than the sand. I awake, and I am still with you. You know, on Sunday mornings, sometimes some of you will come to me on a Sunday morning, and you've got something really important to share with me. And I find it to be really important. I really do. But I don't know how many times I've said to somebody on a Sunday morning, hey, I do find this to be important, but it is Sunday. And I forget a lot of things that I'm told on Sunday morning. I really do. I hate it. I wish it wasn't true, but it's the truth. My mind is all over the place on a Sunday morning, and a lot of it has to do with this moment right here. I'll admit that. But I forget some really important things that people tell me on Sunday morning, because I'm also usually not carrying around anything to write it down with. And then I stop and I think about these words that David writes down here, that there is a God who hears every single thought and every single prayer that I pray, that you pray, that anybody in this entire world prays. If you grew up watching or have watched Bruce Almighty, it's like that scene where Bruce all of a sudden like, these voices won't shut up, and they're like everywhere, and so he uses AOL to try to organize them and all this stuff. It's like that. Like God hears every single thing and never forgets it. Because of how much you and I mean to him, he never forgets it. He hears every thought and every prayer, and he hangs on to it. Because David is reminding us that God knows us. He saw us before we were born. He knows who we are, and he loves us, and he never forgets us. Maybe the better way to put this, and I wish I had put it in your notes and on the screen. The God of the universe who hears everything, who sees everything, who created everything, thinks about us. I mean, just stop for a moment and think how powerful a statement that is that David is making here. Not so that you can puff yourself up and think that you're better than everybody else, but so that you can understand just how important you are to God. He thinks about you. Here in southern Indiana, in a town that I've said it many times over the last 6 years, nobody outside of this area knows exists. But God does. And he thinks about every single person who's in this area. And he loves every single person who's in this area. And then something weird happens with this psalm that David is writing. He's been talking about, God, you are, like, you know everything about me. You've formed me in my mother's womb. It's like this, it's this really, like you could put it in a song and it would be awesome to sing on a Sunday morning. And then we kind of don't really sing about this part on Sunday morning when he says, oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. O men of blood, depart from me. They speak against you with malicious intent. Your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe? You have to say loathe like that. You can't just say loathe. I loathe those who rise up against you. That's the Greek way of saying it. I hate them with complete hatred. Like, not even like, God, I don't like these people. I hate them with complete hatred. I count them my enemies. Like, David looks at guys like, God, you are so great and you have done so much for me and you care so much about me. And because of how much you care about me, I want you to know that I hate everybody who hates you. Because how could they hate you? You are so good. And so, God, I'm going to do you a favor and I'm going to tell you what you should do with them. You should slay those wicked people. And not slay as in like the way that this current generation uses the word slay, but slay like you should just kill those people who hate you. You should chop their heads off, God. That's what I would do. And that's where it comes through. That's where we begin to see that, one, yes, David is looking at God and saying, God, here, let me give you some advice. And then he's looking at God and saying, hey, here's how I feel about this, God. And I believe what we're really seeing here is we're seeing David reveal his own heart. Because David had some enemies. Dude knew what it meant to have enemies. His best friend's dad growing up tried to pin him to a wall with a spear. Like that's a traumatic event in somebody's life. And then as he got older, his own son tried to rebel against him and hunt him down and kill him. That's also a traumatic event. And that's not to mention the kings from other countries that wanted to wipe him out or any rebellions that we don't know about because they're not written down in Scripture. And we begin to see this glimpse into David's heart of this is what you do with your enemies. God, in case you missed it, when you have an enemy and you have the power, you wipe them out. In fact, we saw that in David's story. Even though he's the one who created the enemy, by sleeping with his friend's wife, now his friend is an enemy, and so he had his friend killed. And we see David's heart coming out in this as he's talking to God, as he's sharing with God, this is what you should do. David reveals some of himself, but the encouraging thing as we read through the Scriptures and we see how God continually sees these people who walk away from him and whose hearts don't align with his, that he loves them and he comes for them anyway, is that God sees our hearts. Remember, he already knew David's thoughts. David didn't need to put some Christianese on him, so he just threw it out there. And he still doesn't give up on us. We don't do that for people. I mean, yes, sometimes. I'm not saying every time somebody does something and we see the wickedness in their heart that we just give up on them, but man, if you saw the stuff that was really in my heart sometimes, a lot of you would give up on me. And truth be told, I'd probably reciprocate sometimes. Because human nature begins to pull us away. And what I love is that David just says it. Whereas we sit there and say, oh, bless their hearts. But what we really mean is rip out their hearts. David just says it. And we see that God loves him anyway. But then, and this is the part that I mentioned last week, the church we've got to grasp onto. Because while David has said all of these things about God that are true, and then David has come along and revealed a little bit of his heart here, he follows that up with basically, this is going to be my paraphrase, and then I'll read the actual words. But God, I might not have the right heart about that. That might be a lot of me coming through and not enough of you coming through. And so God, in his words, search me and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts and see if there be any grievous way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. David once again acknowledges and recognizes that God knows him better than he knows himself. And God knows his strengths and he knows his weaknesses. And God knows those spots where David is trying to pursue him but is actually being pulled away by the world. And so David recognizes some truths about sin in just these short statements. he recognizes that sin distorts the self-awareness that we have about ourselves. Because I mentioned last week that it can be so easy to see everybody else's faults and completely miss my own faults. That's sin at work in my life. And Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah writes, "The heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it?" James writes, "But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed." And the author of Hebrews writes, "But encourage one another." This is why this matters right here, what we're doing right here. "But encourage one another daily, as long as it is called today, so that none of you may be hardened by sin's deceitfulness." Sin distorts the self-awareness that we should have about ourselves, and David recognizes that sin blinds us to the things about ourselves and the things in our world. Paul writes about it years later in 2 Corinthians to the church in Corinth, when he says, "In their case, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers." The God who is not God blinds the minds of the unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light that David had written about, the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. David recognizes what people were writing about years later and teaching years later, that sin distorts the self-awareness we have, and it blinds us to the very truth, to the very gospel that is right in front of our faces in this world. And so he says, "Search me, God. Search me and know my thoughts." God, I'm not going to hide it from you. I'm not going to take these parts of my life and be like, "God, I want you to search everything except for that one. I really like that one. Let's hold off on that one for a while. Let's keep that closet off limits." And he says, "Search me and know me and reveal if there's anything within me." Church, there is some fear that can enter in when we truly make that invitation to God to search our hearts. And not just to search them, but to reveal what's in them. I mean, if you think that going to a therapist or a counselor is going to dig into the truth that is in your heart and your mind and your soul, go to the one who already knows and say, "God, you just tell me." See, a therapist will ask you questions, and I believe God will too, but God already knows the answers, and he's pulling it out of you bit by bit. And it can be difficult. We don't like to see what's truly inside of us. But David, the guy who slayed the giant, the guy who was king over Israel, the guy who was a man after God's own heart, said, "God, search me. And if you find anything in me that shouldn't be there, get rid of it. Point it out to me, and let's get rid of it." We can have fear over it because we're afraid of what's inside of us. We can have fear over it because we're ashamed of what's inside of us. Or maybe we even have fear because at times in our lives, it's been used as a weapon against us. It was weaponized, that statement of, "Well, you know God knows what you're doing. If you're doing wrong, you're going to hell." I don't know why I went Southern with that, but it felt like it needed to be Southern. It can be used against us. And so it causes this great fear, but instead, I find there to be great peace in this psalm that David wrote. Because it reminds us that God, he already sees it, but he will reveal to us the unfiltered us. And we don't have to be afraid of that, because God is there to help us turn that into the masterpiece that it was supposed to be in the first place. It reminds us that he knows us, that he has always known us. He knows our strengths and he knows our weaknesses, every single one of them. It reminds us that he knows our sin. He knows all of it. He knows us, and he loves us anyway. No matter what he finds in there, he already knows it's there. But no matter what he reveals to us in there, it's not like he all of a sudden goes, "Oh, never mind. No, he sees it. He knows it. He sees it. He reveals it. And he says, hey, listen close. I love you anyway. I remember some of those moments with my parents, and I've had some of those moments with my kids where I messed up, they've messed up. We had to talk about the mess up. But it was followed with, hey, I love you anyway. You didn't lose my love over this. He loved us enough that he would die for us. And Psalm 139 reminds us that he loves us, that he won't leave us, that he knew us before there wasn't us, that he won't forget us, and that he thinks of us, and that even as he thinks of us and he knows us and all those things are true, he continues to love us no matter what, as we are. But he also loves us enough not to leave us as we are. I mentioned when we were doing baptisms, that one of the symbols that baptism is that it is this symbol of the sin being washed away from us. It is a symbol of the reminder that God comes along, and when we will give him our life, he will take the us that we have, that he loves dearly, that he loves unconditionally, but he will make us into a better us. And when we step into that water and we're baptized, it's that reminder of saying, God, I am giving you the invitation to search my heart and to know me and to reveal if there are any grievous ways within me. And if you find them, to wash them away, to remove them from my life. That's what David told us as he was talking to God, the reminder that he left for us. That's what we see in Psalm 139. And that's what we can still live in today. And that's what we get to do when we have a baptism. And I bring baptism back up because I don't know how this will go. And truthfully, pastors will hesitate because we really hate it when we put out an invitation and then nobody says yes. Because pastors, I'm gonna be really honest with you. Pastors wrestle with pride too. But I'm gonna put this out anyway, knowing that this may not be what anyone's at that point of saying yes for this morning. But I'm wondering if there are even a person in here this morning who is saying, I need to take that step of baptism. I need to take that step of publicly declaring that I am inviting God to search my heart, to know me, to reveal any grievous ways within me, and if he finds them, when he finds them, to remove them from me. I know you didn't come prepared to be baptized this morning. I stayed in shorts just in case. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't have a towel for you. But it may be that God's saying, hey, I need you to take this step this morning. It's time. You've been walking long enough. And I hear the comments people have of, baptism doesn't save you and we don't have to do it. But it's an example that Jesus set. And when he got ready to leave, to ascend into heaven and to leave us his spirit, when his physical body was ready to leave, he said, go into all the nations and make disciples and baptize them. A disciple is baptized. And we can sit here and say, yeah, but I don't need that. And I'm going to go back to the very beginning and say what we're doing at that point is we're telling God, I know better than you do. Because I'm going to take what you told us to do and I'm not going to do it. And so perhaps this morning is your morning to celebrate with the body the decision that you have made and to make that invitation to God. God, search me and know me and reveal the grievous ways within me. If that's you this morning, I'm going to be up here I'm going to be on the platform initially. But if I see you start to come forward, I'm going to walk right off of here and I'm going to meet you. And then we're going to go into that water, which is pretty warm. And we're going to celebrate with you. God, thank you for giving us reminders in scriptures. God, thank you for for all of those things that David reminded us in Psalm 139 about. God, you know us better than we know ourselves. And there's a lot of things about me that I do not love about myself. In fact, there's a lot of moments where I would actually have to admit I don't really love myself all that much, whether it be in a moment or whether it be overall. And there's, I'd say, a decent chance I'm not the only one in this room that feels that way. And so just what I know about myself causes me to struggle to love myself. And yet, you who knows everything about me, you know all the potential that I was created with and all the potential that I've squandered. And yet, you love me anyway. God, you have everybody reaching out to you and asking you for things and approaching you in ways that you're like, this isn't even how I told you to approach me. And yet you don't forget them. And you don't forget about me. And you still think about us. God, David penned these words thousands of years ago. And it's incredible to think that these words are still true for each and every individual who has been born since then and before then. That's enough to blow me away. But then to realize what you think of us in the process. Search us, God. Know us. Reveal to us our hearts. And remind us of what you see when you look at us. Amen.